Hello and welcome to this mini symposium presentation where we'll look at the meaning of inclusion in sport and practice. My name is Peter Downs and I'm the co-founding director of the Inclusion Club, and it's a great pleasure today to be able to chair this session. Can I start though by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting today, that's the Ngunnawal people from the Australian Capital Territory, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Now we have three great presentations today lined up for you. Each one will take a different perspective on the meaning of inclusion in sport. The first is from Vera Dekkers, who will look at the meaning of inclusion according to children with disability, parents and sports professionals. The second, from Maxine de Jong, will look at the meaning of inclusion according to different stakeholder groups. And then Sabina Rakta will look at the meaning of inclusion from a more elite perspective for athletes and coaches. Now, the purpose behind these presentations is really to try and shed some light and common thinking about the meaning of inclusion across different stakeholders. I know from my work here in Australia over the past 3 decades, we still have important differences in how people and organisations perceive inclusion. And this is an ongoing problem and challenge. Because when we discuss policy, when we design programs, when we develop research, when we produce resources, we cannot be sure, if we don't have that common understanding, if we're actually talking about the same thing. We do need greater consistency in our thinking about inclusion, both domestically and internationally. So hopefully today we can shed a little bit of a light on the issue. After today's presentations, we will be joined by Catherine Carty as well, who is the UNESCO Chair Project Manager, who will lead the discussion with our panelists and also participants. First, let me introduce you then to Vera Dekkers from the In Holland University of Applied Sciences, who will present on the meaning of inclusion according to children with disability, parents and sports professionals, a focus group study of the Sport Empowers Disabled Youth 2 project.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Vera Dekkers and I'm a researcher at In Holland University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. Today I present to you the results of our research on behalf of the Sport Empowers Disabled Youth 2 project, abbreviated the SEDI2 project. I will present the results of our focus group study with children with a disability, parents and sport professionals about the meaning of inclusion in sport in practice. As you can see on the sheet, I worked on this study together with an international team of colleagues. I will start describing the aim and method of our focus group study. The SEDI2 project aims to increase the inclusion of children with disabilities by raising their sport and exercise participation in inclusive settings. To be able to do so, we wanted to start with listening to the real voices of the children themselves, and also of the parents and sport professionals in their environment, and to hear what they think about inclusion in sport. Such a complex concept as inclusion needs time, openness and discussion. A focus group interview is a very good setting for people to express themselves and to talk about their ideas, opinions and wishes regarding a specific topic. Therefore, we conducted focus group interviews with the children themselves, their parents and sport professionals in the 4 countries participating in the project, which are Finland, Portugal, Lithuania and the Netherlands. A thematic approach was used for data analysis, using MaxQDA for coding the data. Looking at the results of our study, out of all data from the children, the parents and the professionals out of the focus group, we defined 7 different themes on the meaning of inclusion in practice. We found 4 themes for all stakeholder groups, 2 themes specific for the parents and professionals, and a last theme only discussed by the professionals. I will explain these themes one by one and will tell you what the different stakeholder groups had to tell about the specific themes on the meaning of inclusion. Let's start with our first theme, which is having a choice regarding sport. children themselves say that they value whether for them it has been possible to choose their own sport or hobby themselves. Parents underline the importance of having a choice and state that their child should be able to choose a sport that fits the child and comes from their passion. For professionals, it is important to give children the opportunity to try out different sport out of the options they have and to make their own choice. The second theme is having a sense of belonging. For children themselves, it's important to feel welcome and to have a sense of belonging to a group. Parents underline the sense of belonging in games and practices and the friendship sport provides. For professionals, inclusion is about feeling welcome and being part of a group or team. This sense of belonging can happen in a regular group, in a regular club, in a separate group, in a regular club, in a disability-specific sports group, or in any other type of activity, as long as the child is feeling welcome and feeling part of that group or club. The third theme is called Same Rights and Equality and is about children with disabilities having the same rights in sport as anyone else and about feeling equal and having equal opportunities. One of the children says it very nicely. We're all equal and we're all different. Parents see that their child with a disability doesn't have the same rights and possibilities as able-bodied children and state that this needs to change. Because whereas every person has the same right to participate in play, recreation and sporting activities, this equal access has not proven to be the case for youth with a disability. Regarding equality in sport, professionals gave the example of reverse inclusion. Able-bodied persons participating in a disability-specific sport as sitting volleyball. In their eyes, an example of full equalization. The fourth theme is everyone can participate. It was worth noticing that almost all the children participating in the focus groups stated that everyone can participate in sport. Not necessarily in the same way, but in their own way everyone can participate. Parents and professionals also underline that everyone counts and that the environment should adapt on the personal circumstances and individual wishes and needs of children with a disability, to make it possible for them to participate in sport. The fifth theme, only stated by parents and professionals, is acknowledge that everyone is unique. They state that everyone with or without a disability is unique and that one has some nuances and another has others. The environment of children with a disability has to acknowledge these differences and uniqueness and therefore a mentality in society in general and the culture within the sport has to change, they state. The sixth theme is inclusion is an ongoing process and is also only stated by parents and professionals. Both parents and professionals experience inclusion in sport as a multi-stage and ongoing process. Within this theme, differences between the various countries regarding inclusion in sport became visible. But unfortunately, today we don't have enough time to go in depth on this interesting finding. The seventh and last theme is terminology is challenging and is only stated by professionals. I quote, and we're still dealing with these things. So in a way that think that we shouldn't create a fear in the field with these jungle of terms. Like that, help, it's too difficult, I don't understand, so I definitely can't do it in practice either. This is also one of the reasons why we started this project. Sport professionals struggle with the terminology regarding inclusion in sports. They are talking about the jungle of terms and they experience that it's hard to use the right words. It seems that professionals between themselves have consensus regarding inclusion, but the term inclusion seems to be used differently in the field, for example on policy level. In addition, talking about inclusion seems to scare coaches and trainers, and labeling children or a sport as disabled can be experienced as an extra barrier. Ending with our conclusion. From our research, we can say that for children with a disability, their parents and professionals, inclusion in sport means having a choice, being equal, and having the same rights in sport as others, so that everyone can participate in sports in their own way and have a sense of belonging. Parents and sport professionals state that inclusion is an ongoing process, not a journey that happened overnight, in which terminology can be challenging, and the environment needs to acknowledge that everyone is unique, same as you and I are unique and have other needs and wishes. This will result in the SETI Sport Participation and Inclusion Tool, abbreviated the SPIN tool. The collected data and identified themes will be used to develop interventions within the SETI2 project to encourage sport professionals and others to reach inclusive sport settings for children with a disability and make an impact on their life. We are looking forward to discuss this important topic with you. Please follow us on Twitter and take a look at our website. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vera. We're going to move straight on now to our next presentation. It's from Maxine de Jong from the Mulier Institute. And Maxine's going to talk about the meaning of inclusion in sport and physical activity according to various stakeholders in the Netherlands.
Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation on the meaning of inclusion in sport and physical activity according to various stakeholders in the Netherlands. My name is Maxine de Jonge and I'll be presenting today also on behalf of my colleague Caroline van Lindert, who you'll meet later on in the discussion. Both of us work as researchers at the Mulier Institute. The Mulier Institute is a research institute in the Netherlands for sport and physical activity. So to start off, I wanted to give you some background on sports for people with a disability in the Netherlands. In the past 40 years, we've moved from a more segregated sports environment where people with a disability could only participate in disability-specific sports towards integration in the early 2000s. The national sports federations were responsible for integrating disability sports into the mainstream federations. So in the Netherlands, we don't have any separate federations for disability sports and mainstream sports. They're all together in one. And more recently, we've moved towards inclusion. In 2016, the national government ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability. And in 2018, the Ministry of Public Health, Welfare and Sports signed the National Sports Agreement. And this National Sports Agreement is comprised of 5 sub-agreements, one of which is inclusive sport. And at the Mulier Institute, it's one of our jobs to monitor this policy, this inclusive sport policy. And one of the first questions that popped up when we were starting this research was, well, what does inclusion mean? So the purpose of this project, or the research we're presenting today, was to discover how the various stakeholder groups who are ultimately responsible for creating this inclusive sport environment, such as policymakers, sports federations, sports clubs, and community sports coaches, how do they define inclusive sports and physical activity? So the research we're presenting today was part of a larger research project that we conducted throughout 2020. And today we'll just be presenting a small portion of the results, and the results are still preliminary. We're still trying to analyze all of our data. But so for this project, we conducted, interviewed, and surveyed stakeholders at various levels. At the national level, we interviewed representatives from governmental and non-governmental agents in sports and organizations for people with a disability. For example, we interviewed a representative from the Ministry of Public Health, Welfare and Sports, someone from the National Olympic Committee, a representative from disability sports organizations, so various stakeholders active at the national level. We also surveyed sports federations, and at the regional level, we surveyed regional coordinators, and these people are responsible for organizing sports for people with a disability at the regional level. And at the local level, we surveyed municipal workers, sports clubs, and community sports coaches. And community sports coaches are responsible for promoting sports and physical activity for all citizens. So one of the things we asked all of the stakeholders to do in both the interviews and the surveys was to tell us what their first associations were with the words inclusion and inclusion in sports. And you can see their answers here. These are the most common answers. And some of them are more related to inclusion in general, such as participation and accessibility, and other terms are more sports related, such as sports club and physical activity. So in the stakeholder surveys, we presented the participants with several statements related to the meaning of inclusion and asked them to indicate to what extent they agreed or disagreed with the statement. And I'll be sharing a few of those with you today. So the first one was people with a disability should participate at the same sports club or sports provider as people without a disability. And you can see here that the stakeholders gave varying answers. The sports clubs and sports federations were generally in agreement with this statement that people with and without a disability should be participating in sports at the same clubs. Community sports coaches and municipalities were a little bit more hesitant in agreeing with the statement, and you can see that the regional coordinators tended to disagree with the statement that people with and without a disability don't necessarily need to be participating at the same sports clubs. So another statement that we presented the stakeholders with was that inclusion can only take place if people with and without a disability meet each other at a sports club and provider. And you can see that the majority of the stakeholders are in agreement with this statement and that they think that interaction between people with and without a disability is an important requirement for achieving an inclusive sports environment. We also presented the stakeholders with the statement, an inclusive environment for sport and physical activity is achieved when everyone can fulfill their own wishes and or meet his or her needs. And you can see here again, the majority of the stakeholders are in agreement with this situation. I think it's important that people with a disability are able to participate in sport in the way that they want to, in a way that meets their needs. However, what's interesting that is not shown on this slide, but we've also seen in the results that the stakeholders are unaware of what people with a disability want and need. So there's a gap between what they hope to do and what they know. So those were some brief results from the surveys, and now I'd like to share some of the results from the interviews with you. So in the interviews with the stakeholders at the national level, we presented them with these 4 categories: inclusion, integration, segregation, and exclusion, and asked them to identify activities in sports that fall under the 4 different categories. And what's interesting to see here is that the same activity can fall into different categories depending on the context. So, for example, if people with a disability, with and without a disability, are participating in sports at the same club, it can be inclusion if the participants with a disability are also invited to the social events, if they can use the same fields and the same facilities as the people without a disability. But it's integration if they're officially part of the club, but they can't use the same facilities and they never get invited to any of the social events. The same goes for disability-specific sports clubs. The stakeholders consider this inclusion if that is what the person with a disability wants, if they want to be engaging in sport in that kind of environment. But they also see it as segregation because the people with a disability are then physically separated from people without a disability. So it depends on the context if activities are inclusive or not. So we'd also like to share some of the recurring themes that we've seen throughout the interviews that we conducted. I don't have enough time to delve into all of them, but I'll briefly highlight a few. One thing we see again here is that the stakeholders emphasize the importance of the interaction between people with and without a disability in achieving inclusion. We see that the stakeholders have a preference for the organized mainstream sports setting, that they believe that it's best if people with a disability are included in the already established mainstream organized sports and move away from the disability-specific sports clubs. And another thing that's interesting that they mention is that there's a clash with the inherently exclusive element of sports. Sports can be exclusive, especially if you want to compete at a higher level. Not everyone is good enough to perform at a certain level And this can conflict with the concept behind inclusion, that everyone can participate and everyone is allowed to participate in sports. So if we look at all of our results from the surveys and the interviews, we can come to a few conclusions. First, that the stakeholders are aware of what inclusion means. And this is a good first step, but it's important to turn these words and ideas into action so that we can actually achieve this inclusive sports environment and not just all be aware of its importance. Secondly, stakeholders are unaware of the wishes and needs of persons with a disability. This can be problematic, especially if they're creating programs and policies. Then there's the risk that they don't match the needs of people with a disability and are then unsuccessful. So it's really important to involve people with a disability in these conversations and processes in order to create meaningful policy and programs. And lastly, inclusion can occur on a spectrum. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for inclusive sport, and it really depends on the people involved and the context as to what the ideal solution is to create an inclusive sports environment. So that's our presentation for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you later on in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Maxine. Finally, we're going to hear from Sabina Radke from the University of Paderborn. And Sabine's going to talk about the meaning of inclusion according to stakeholders' perceptions in Paralympic sport, the perception of elite athletes, coaches and officials in Germany.
Hello everybody, my name is Sabine Radke. I'm a professor for inclusion in sport at the University of Paderborn in Germany, and I'm happy to be part of this mini symposium and to talk to you about the following topic: the meaning of inclusion according to the stakeholders' perceptions in Paralympic sport, the perception of elite athletes, coaches and officials in Germany. Here's my agenda. First, I would like to give you some background about sport for people with a disability in Germany. After that, I will briefly present our research project before I talk about selected results and answer the following questions. What is the view of an inclusive elite sport system according to the officials, the coaches, and the elite athletes? I will end with the athletes' wishes concerning inclusion as an ongoing process. On this slide, we see the 4 different steps from exclusion to inclusion. Germany's sport system is somewhere between step 2 and 3, that means between separation and integration. This is because most sports associations in Germany have not yet brought together sports for people with and without disability at national and regional level. In Germany, we still have a largely separate system at the organizational level. Here, on the left side, you see sports club members without disabilities organized in their clubs, their regional and national federations, up to their umbrella sports organization, the German Olympic Sport Confederation. On the right side, you see sports club members with disabilities who are organized in their own system. The most overlap and exchange is probably at the grassroots level. Here there are very good examples of excellent inclusive sport projects. Some Olympic federations already cooperate with the sport for people with a disability. But the higher the level, the more one tends to keep to oneself. And so in Germany, there are also 2 teams in high performance sport that have a similar but not the same name. On the one hand, it is Team D, Team Germany, Team Deutschland, and on the other hand, it is Team D Paralympics. The results I will present to you are from a research project in which we studied German Paralympic training centers. One of the aims of that project was to investigate the synergies and collaborations between Olympic and Paralympic sports. In total, we conducted 92 interviews with 3 different interview groups: the athletes, the coaches, and the officials. The question to answer today is: what do athletes, coaches, and officials associate with inclusion in elite sport? For the officials we interviewed who work at club level or in a Paralympic training center, like the official that you can see here on the slide, inclusion in elite sport means an environment for para-athletes to train under professional conditions equivalent to Olympic sports and to be offered the best possible conditions for success.
Kriterien sind für Sportler, egal ob mit oder ohne Behinderung, zum Großteil identisch. Da geht es darum, dass man täglich trainieren kann oder mehrmals täglich, eine gute Betreuung hat, eine Absicherung in der dualen Karriere, also sowohl die schulische bzw. berufliche Laufbahn gemeinsam mit der sportlichen Laufbahn planen kann und abgesichert ist als Sportler.
Coaches talk about inclusion when they see athletes with and without a disability interacting socially. But not only the contact between elite athletes is crucial for them, but also the contact between Olympic and Paralympic coaches. For them, inclusion means that the coaches from the Olympic area recognize Paralympic sport as elite sport as well, and that there's no fear of contact between the athletes or between the coaches. However, it is striking that the coaches are not in principle in favor of Olympic and Paralympic athletes training together. In their opinion, the needs and requirements of para-athletes are often too different, as this coach here on the slide expresses in the following video.
Man darf auch im Parasport nicht vergessen, dass es einfach Geschichten gibt, wo Sportler gerade am Anfang ihrer Karriere sehr, sehr viel Unterstützung brauchen, wo man auf individuelle Behinderungen eingehen muss und wo man mit den Sportlern arbeiten muss. Und das ist in einer normalen Trainingsgruppe mit Nichtbehinderten überhaupt nicht möglich.
The athletes themselves, on the other hand, do talk about inclusive training settings, although they agree that the opinion is quite diverse here. For them, it is important that they, as athletes, have the choice right from the start of their sporting career. Some athletes want to train in an inclusive setting from the beginning. This is especially the case for athletes who first acquire their disability through an accident or illness. Other athletes emphasize that at the beginning of the career they still needed a protected space where they were among themselves, where they did not risk being looked at strangely, where very specific consideration was given to their disability. Therefore, at that time, they preferred a disability-specific training environment at grassroots level. The majority of athletes agree, however, that they definitely want training in the elite area with as much overlap as possible with Olympic high-performance sport.
Ist diese Unterscheidung zwischen olympischen und paralympischen Athleten im Training nie wichtig.
This is an expression of the explicit wish to be seen as a competitive athlete and not as a person with a disability or a second-class athlete. Inclusion for them means being allowed to use the same infrastructure as Olympic athletes, that they receive the same financial support, that they are equally covered in the media. Last but not least, they talk about inclusive competition settings, which for them does not mean that they compete against the Olympic athletes, but that they compete in the same event. Now at the end, as announced, I would like to refer to the 7 main themes on the meaning of inclusion presented by Afka and Vera in the beginning of that mini-symposium. What is obvious is that the topic everyone can participate does not play a role in high-performance sport. As not everyone can be an Olympic athlete, not everyone can be a Paralympic athlete. However, what is crucial for the stakeholders of parasports in terms of inclusion is the following. First, sense of belonging. That means that for the athletes, it is extremely important to be seen as dedicated athletes. That's their identity, not the fact that they have a disability. Second, same rights and equality. Athletes must get the same access to the sports-related support system as their Olympic counterparts. Third, having a choice between inclusive and disability-specific training settings. They themselves are able to decide what is best for them, not other people. Inclusion is definitely an ongoing process. What I would like to emphasize, what I have presented here in the last 10 minutes is largely theory. We are still a long way off when it comes to inclusion. Above all, there are far too many barriers. Let's hear what the interviewers think about those barriers.
In anderen Ländern geht das, in Norwegen zum Beispiel, dort klappt es, es muss Mittel und Wege geben und am Ende hapert es einfach an der Einstellung.
Bei den Menschen was verändern, das haben die Briten geschafft. Sie sind in Schulen gegangen, haben den Parasport da installiert, haben denen beigebracht, was ist Parasport. Es gab Arbeitsbücher dazu und sowas muss in Deutschland einfach auch passieren.
Beiderseitiges Einverständnis zu sagen, wir wollen miteinander leben und nicht abgesondert voneinander.
I thank you for your attention and I'm looking forward to our discussion now.
Thank you, Sabine. And that concludes our 3 presentations for this mini symposium, looking at inclusion in sport and what does it mean in practice. We're now going to head straight into a live discussion, which will be led by the UNESCO Chair, Catherine Carty.